All right, we're going to do notes on how to write an equation in slope-intercept form given standard form. So you're just going to write this in your spiral notebook, okay? All right, so to get started, we just got a reminder. Well, what is slope-intercept form? Slope-intercept form is the form y equals mx plus b, where m is the slope and b is the y-intercept. So now, what is standard form? Standard form looks like this: ax plus by equals c. And then so here is an example of an equation written in slope-intercept form, or in standard form, sorry. So 3x plus 2y equals 12. Okay. And so what we're going to talk about today is how do we then change an equation written in standard form to slope-intercept form. And the way we do that is we just solve the equation for y, meaning we need to get y by itself. So we're going to go through 6 examples on how to do that. So, example 1, we have 2x plus y equals 3. So again, we're trying to get y by itself. So that means we need to move the 2x to the other side. So we're going to subtract 2x from both sides. That cancels. And now we're left with y on the left. And then make sure we want to put the other side in the mx plus b form. So we want to put the x term first. So it'll be negative 2x. And because this is a positive 3, it'll be plus 3. So now in slope-intercept form, that equation is y is equal to negative 2x plus 3, where we know that the slope is negative 2 and the y-intercept is a positive 3. Okay. All right, so we'll try another one. Example 2. 4x plus 5y equals negative 30. So now this time, y has a coefficient other than 1, but we can still do that. We're still going to solve for y, so we're going to get y by ourselves. We're still going to move the 4x first, so we're going to subtract 4x from both sides. But now the 4x is canceled, so I'm going to bring down 5y is equal to, now make sure you put the x term first, so it's negative 4x minus 30. But at this point, we still haven't gotten y by itself because the 5 is still attached to it. And so what we're going to do is now we're going to divide both sides by 5. So we're going to divide that side by 5. But what I want you to do on the other side is divide each term by 5. That's the same thing as dividing the whole thing by 5 is dividing each term by 5. So therefore, here, the 5's cancel, so we're left with y is equal to, and then so we got negative 4 divided by 5, which as simplified would be negative 4/5 x. And then we have a minus 30 over 5, which is minus 6. Y is now by itself, so now we have the equation in slope-intercept form. And in this case, we know that the slope is a negative 4/5, and the y-intercept is a negative 6. So once we take it from standard form to slope-intercept form, we should be able to interpret what's the slope and the y-intercept. All right, example 3. We get x minus 3y equals 12. So again, we know we want to get y by itself. So the first thing we're going to move is the x term. So I'm going to subtract x from both sides. The x's cancel. Now watch, there's a negative sign or a minus sign here. That needs to come down. So now we have negative 3y is equal to, remember the x term goes first, so negative x plus 12. And at this time, we still don't have y by itself. So now we got to get rid of the negative 3. And we're going to get rid of the negative 3 by dividing by negative 3. And remember, we're going to divide each term by negative 3. So now the negative 3's cancel. And we're left with y is equal to, now this term in front of this is technically a negative 1. So we have a negative 1 over a negative 3, which is a positive 1/3 x. And then we got a positive 12 divided by a negative 3, which is minus 4. So now we had to identify the slope is positive 1/3 and the y-intercept is negative 4. So we really can't, it's not as easy to identify that in standard form, but if we change standard form to slope-intercept form, we should be able to identify the slope and the y-intercept. Example 4, we got x minus y equals negative 8. So again, we want y by itself. So we are going to subtract x from both sides. So now, because, be careful, we got that minus there, so we bring that down. Negative y is equal to x term first minus 8. Now, we're not done because we don't want to know what a negative y is. We want to know about a positive y. And so just in case you forgot, that really is a negative 1. So we're going to divide everything by negative 1. So now we're left with y is equal to, the negative 1's cancel, and then we have negative x over negative 1. So remember, that's a 1, so a negative 1 over a negative 1 is a positive 1x. But you don't have to write the 1, you just need the x. Okay, so then this is x, and negative 8 divided by a negative 1 is a positive 8. So now, moving that equation from standard form to slope-intercept form, it's y equals x plus 8. And so now we should be able to identify that the slope is 1 and that the y-intercept is positive 8. Example 5. We have 4x minus y equals 0. So we need to still get y by itself. So we're going to move the 4x from both sides. 4x's cancel. We got a minus y. Make sure you bring that down. Equals negative 4x plus 0. Now, because it's the plus 0, like we learned in the previous lesson, we don't need it. So right now we're just stuck with negative y equals negative 4x. And we don't want negative y, we want positive y. So we're going to divide that by negative 1, and we're going to divide this by negative 1. So now we are left with y is equal to 4x, and the y-intercept was 0, so that number was 0, and that's all we have left. So our equation gives us a slope of 4 and a y-intercept of 0. In our last example, example number 6, we want to get, again, y by itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to move the x term. And we're going to subtract. You have a minus. Make sure you bring that down. So negative 2y is equal to negative 3x plus 14. We still want to get y by itself. It's not by itself yet. So we need to divide by a negative 2. So we're going to divide everything by a negative 2. So here, the negative 2's cancel. We have y is equal to, now negative 3 divided by a negative 2, simplify that, leave it as a fraction, 3/2 x. And now we have 14 divided by a negative 2, which is a negative 7. And so now our slope for this equation is positive 3/2. And our y-intercept is negative 7. All right, and that's the end of the notes.